Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited for all of you attending to get to know Eric Handberg, author of The Little Book of Gold. I'm Virginia. I'm a member of Little Green Lights team. I'm also someone who has worked for small nonprofits, so I myself am a big fan of Eric's books. I found them to be enormously helpful. I've got my copy here. It's very dog-eared. If you take a look, I would call it well-loved. It's something I refer to often. I think you'll all find the same. So I'm so happy that today you get a chance to learn directly from Eric and you can apply his insights to your own work at your organization. So just to give you a sense of this webinar together, we'll start with introductions. Then Eric will share his top 3 fundraising tips, which I'm excited to hear. We'll then move into our Q&A portion of our time together. We'll be answering questions that you all submitted when you registered. So do just note that unfortunately we don't have the opportunity to answer any questions you may submit via chat during this session. So hi Eric, it's great to see you. Thanks for sharing your time with us today. I'm going to share Eric's bio with you. So in case you all aren't familiar with Eric yet, you can get a sense of our expert today. So Eric Handberg has spent nearly 20 years working with nonprofits. In addition to serving as the director of 2 nonprofits, he has served as an interim executive director twice and worked for nonprofits in marketing and fundraising. He's also served on boards and committees for more than a dozen organizations, often in leadership roles and several times during a capital campaign. Eric is the author of 4 books for nonprofits, focusing on nonprofit management, fundraising, social media, and board governance, which have collectively sold tens of thousands of copies. They've been praised as essential reads for nonprofits by Forbes.com, LinkedIn for Nonprofits, Kirkus Reviews, and thousands of executive directors and board members. So that's a bit about Eric. In addition to Eric's books being chock full of practical advice for people who work at nonprofits or volunteer at nonprofits, they really stand out to me personally because they're written for small, and as Eric says, very small nonprofits. In my experience, I found it can be really challenging to find resources that speak directly to small organizations. A lot of resources directed to nonprofits are talking to organizations with a marketing department of 10 or 3 major gift officers. And for those of us who are one person trying to wear many hats, or we're sharing the load with 3 other part-time staff trying to wear many hats, often that advice isn't really relevant. It's great ideas, it's inspiring, but we just can't start where they're telling us to start. So I'm interested that Eric took a different direction in his work, and whereas so many other people in this landscape choose to talk to larger nonprofits, Eric chose to devote his attention to smaller nonprofits specifically. So Eric, as we get started, I'm wondering if you can share as you started working on nonprofits and decided to take this big jump to write for nonprofits, what made you feel compelled to target those smaller organizations that so often don't get attention?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. And thank you for what a kind welcome. I really appreciate it, and I love working with Little Green Light. I think when I decided to start writing, I was writing to my younger self when it really comes down to it. I followed a passion for movies and film into the world of nonprofit, where I was the director of a small nonprofit movie theater. And I tried everything when it came to fundraising. I had events and we did mailings. We tried not a restaurant takeover, but like a bookstore takeover where a percentage of the profits came to us. I tried everything. Later, I had an experience working in a fundraising office for a Catholic high school. And that's where I really learned professional fundraising. And I learned that the things that I had been copying, like throwing a massive gala, were not necessarily the way to go for a small organization. And I learned what worked really well, what translated based on my experience. And that's why I really set out to write The Little Book of Gold in particular. Like, here's what makes sense. This is the stuff that you should leave. Leave that for the big guys. Here's something that is actually practical at the scale of a small nonprofit.
Yeah, so that's great. So what you've shared really gets to the heart of why we at Little Green Light got so excited about your books and about The Little Book of Gold. in particular, because it's really clear as you read your books that you're writing from a place of genuine understanding of what the day-to-day life is at a small nonprofit. You understand the challenges, but you also know what works, what doesn't. So it's clear you can guide others to how most effectively to spend your time, what's going to get you results. And I think it's also clear that while small organizations, their scale, their staff, their resources may be limited, the work is not small at all. You're all doing big things in your communities, and it's important that you target your time and your energy and your focus, right towards the fundraising activities that are going to support your mission. So as we were getting excited about Eric's books, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could get this book into the hands of every LGL customer, think what they could do with this information. That is a lofty goal, but thankfully Eric was game to give it a shot. So we've partnered with Eric, and so if you're a Little Greenlight customer, you can get a free copy of the Little Book of Gold through 2022. As we were jazzed up about this partnership, we also wanted to take Eric's his work a step further specifically for our customers. So with Eric's permission, we wrote LGL's companion guide to the Little Book of Gold. And this is a really nice coupling if you're using Little Greenlight, because each chapter of Eric's book covers an essential aspect of fundraising, talks about the strategy, why you do it, the best ways to do it. And then our companion guide drills further into the nitty-gritty to say, okay, this is what the advice you're taking from Eric. You're using Little Greenlight as your donor management system. Here's how to use LGL to take these efforts and manage them effectively. So we think it's a great combo. If you haven't already, we hope you'll check out both of those resources designed specifically for you all. And so that's a bit of a background about how LGL and Eric came together. And now I know we're all really eager to hear Eric's top tips for us. So I will turn it over to you, Eric.
Well, thank you for that. And I will just put a plug in for that companion guide. What a great way to take principle into practice. Really detailed information there. So I hope folks check that out. Let's talk about some fundraising tips. It's really hard to figure out, like, what is a tip that encompasses everyone. There's so many different kinds of nonprofits out there. But I worked really hard to come up with 3 principles, as much as they are tips, that I think will guide fundraising at any organization. And so let's start at the top. So here's my first tip, and it might sound basic: ask for money. That's it. So many ideas that people have for raising money are actually attempts to avoid simply asking. And if you really think about it, raffles, you're selling tickets. I'm thinking about like that restaurant takeover where you're trying to get people to come, so a percentage of it comes back to you. The bake sale idea, friend raisers, that's one where it's like, we're going to have a whole event and not ask for money. There's all of these different things that people try when it comes to fundraising. And I really want to push you that real fundraising starts with the plan on how you're going to ask for money. Fundraising can be scary. Like, I understand that. It's a personal thing. It's something that we're trained from an early age not to talk about in a lot of ways. Your money's personal, other people's money's personal. And we're getting, we have to get over that a little bit so that we can really take that plunge. And there's some different ways that we can ask, and we can go to the next slide. I really want to encourage you to be ready to ask in a variety of different ways. Asking in person, this is actually how the book starts. How to ask someone in person, for money. Can you support our nonprofit with a gift of $500? That is an important skill, and we go through the steps in the book. Ask your board for money. It's a good way to practice, so that's something to think about as well. That's how I first started doing it with my board, is I wanted to practice with them. You're also going to want to build up everything so that you can ask in a letter. Now, that could be an email as well as a letter. Letters are more effective, but again, I often see people, they don't want to actually ask in the letter. They bury the fundraising ask, at the very bottom, and they tell a whole story for a page. It's like, no, put it at the top. Tell someone what you're doing, why you want their time, why you want them to read the letter. Put that ask at the top. And then you get all of those folks together and you have an event. And again, you have an ask at the event. We often have events that don't really feature that, but what I would really put to you is that if you really take an event and you structure everything around this ask, how can we make this ask the most important part of it with inspiring, helpful, useful information before it? It's a powerful tool when you actually get right down to it. That person hopefully is inspired, they're ready to open up their checkbook. It's a really powerful thing. And then you repeat. You take these basic steps and you do it again the next year and you try to do it a little bit better. Asking for money, tip number 1. So this one I'm going to read out directly here for our second tip. I encourage you to care about the next dollar as much as you care about this dollar. And let me explain what I mean by that. So let's imagine that a donor gets out that checkbook and writes you a check for $100. That's a win. That's exciting. However you did, whatever work you did to get that money, you should celebrate that. But professional fundraising, truly professional fundraising, is knowing how to get that $100 again from that donor next year. Or maybe being ready to ask that donor for $250 or $500 or whatever it is. How can you take this money and get ready to ask it for it again next year? And on the next slide, we cover some of those things. So let's think about what that actually takes. It takes a database. This is where LGL really comes in here. You're going to need the donor's name. You're going to need contact information. That might mean an address, so you can write them a letter. That might mean an email or a phone number. You need to know how to get a hold of this person. That's just the basic way that you even are going to have a chance to come back to this person. You're also going to need to have some sort of record of the gift. If you want to be able to ask for $100 next year, you need to have in your database now what that person gave. The only way future you is going to remember how much to ask for is if you have a record of it now. And a lot of places, they don't get this data, and that doesn't give them the opportunity to build later. But a database is only part of this story. The other part of it is having the systems or having the goal even of keeping that relationship alive. So if someone gives $100, what does that mean to you? Does that mean that they get onto your member newsletter, if you have members? Does that mean that they get a twice a year impact report that tells them how you are doing good in the community? Or maybe this is a person where you're like, I know I could get 500 from him next year. Maybe then this is a person for a backstage tour. Maybe this is a person to invite for coffee. Maybe there's a speaker who talks about issues related to your nonprofit, and you want to invite them to be your guest to come listen to that speaker because this person's a major donor prospect. Whatever it is, great. But the key is you have to have this person slotted in so that you understand how to go about thanking them for that first gift and then cultivating the next one. And that is the relational side of it. When you start to put those two things together, the data and then the relationship, that's how you take $100 this year and turn it into $100 or $250 or even more next year. So whenever you get that donation, celebrate it, but make sure you have the systems in place to go get it again. And we'll go to tip 3. So here's my next tip for you. Start from the inside and work your way out. And I had fun with the slides on this one to create a visual. So we're going to go to a visual with a little smiley happy face. And what I want you to do is imagine that that's you and that's your nonprofit. The next circle, that smallest circle, are the people closest to your organization. That would be your board members. That would be some of your major donors, people who already know and love you. It's the people who are really tight with you and what you do. Outside of that, the next circle out, That might be just your regular donors, maybe some volunteers, people who know and like you, but they're not in that super tight closest ring. Outside of that, that's your subscribers, your people who are on your email newsletter, the people who you serve in the community, people who like you on Facebook. They have some way that they've identified themselves as being like, I like you, but they just haven't given yet. The next circle out, that's people who would like you if they knew who you were. They are, familiar, but they're just not quite into those inner circles yet. Sorry, it's not that they're not familiar. They would like you, they would be familiar, you just haven't reached them yet. And this is where we kind of switch out into marketing. And then outside of that is the general public. And one of the things that we often do, if we go to the next slide, is whenever we think about fundraising or marketing, really, is we think about this person here represented by the red X. We're like, how could we get this person to give? How could we get this person to attend our play, use our service? And in my experience at the scale and budget of a small nonprofit, worrying about this person it's just not worth it. It's either expensive because you spend a lot of money trying to get this person who is maybe not predisposed to like you anyway, or it's just kind of futile in terms of you're thinking, what if we could get everyone in town to give us $1? And that's our fundraising campaign this year. And it's because people don't want to focus on this inside circle. These circles on the left here are where all the power is. And what I want to put to you, if we go to the next slide, is that our goal is to move people inward just one step. That is where the power of this model really shows up. So think about what that might mean. Take those donors. How do you make them major donors? How do you make them board members? Take those people who are on your email list. How do you make them, get them to take that first step and become a donor for the first time? Is that an event? Is that just you work really hard on that next email or letter? How does that work? How do you get the people who are just aware of you, or how do you get them to subscribe to your Facebook page, or how do you get them on your email list? So this is a series of much smaller steps that I think is a really effective way to think about, again, both the fundraising side and even some of the marketing side. Take everyone and create a plan on, we have these 5 different audiences. How do I get people just a little bit closer each time? And that is a really powerful tool for growing your organization. We have a couple more notes on this for the fundraising side. In particular, with those people who are closest to you, with that focus, you have some real opportunity to target them. Now that you know that you're not trying to talk to everyone, really you can now speak to those people in a very intentional way. So targeted appeals, trying to increase the giving of those inner circles. It's a really important tool. So I really recommend this tip as well as you think about your whole nonprofit systemically.
Thanks, Eric, for those tips. So something that jumps out at me, especially with your tip number 3, is when you talk about your goal is wherever people are on those circles outside your organization, your goal is to move them one step closer to the center where that power that you talked about lies. And I think for everyone in attendance today, you're all at different places in your fundraising at your organization, but I think that idea comes through in your writing and can be implied to all of our work, and that maybe you're starting out, you don't have a donor management system yet. Maybe you did your first annual appeal last year and it kind of worked, but it was kind of a nightmare to get out and you were stressed and you would like to do a better job this year. Or maybe you're ready to start a planned giving program to take that step. So whatever step you're in at your organization, that's okay, that's great, you've gotten to that step. Your next goal is to just inch it towards more effective fundraising. I think that approach makes everything feel a lot less overwhelming, a lot more manageable, and I think even kind of motivating to work towards that goal.
Well, and it's really nice to not take those people for granted either. It's very common to always try to get new people in, but love hard on the people who already love you. Show them attention, give them special opportunities. If you're beloved, they're going to start talking about you. They'll start doing some of your work for you. Oh, you should totally join our major giving program because, with me, because you get to get this special thing. You get to have special access. Like it's the kind of thing that if you do it really well, they start doing some of your work for you, and that's a really exciting place to be too.
Yeah, definitely. I think because with that approach, you may have 5 people who know about you and love you now, but you take good care of them, and that, like you said, they do the work to grow it out to 20, and it grows from
Yeah,
there. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, great. Well, thank you. You've given all of us a lot to think about. We're going to move into the Q&A portion now. I have to admit, when we started planning this webinar, I had a little worry in the back of my head thinking, well, what if people register but nobody submits any questions? What do we do if our Ask the Expert is just sort of quiet time? But I shouldn't have worried about that whatsoever, because you all submitted close to 200 questions, which is fantastic. The drawback, of course, is that we cannot answer each and every single one of those today. And as I mentioned at our opening, we won't have the opportunity to answer any new questions during the session. But if you do have a question in your mind now, or that's just popped up as Eric was sharing his top tips with us, do go ahead and submit it via chat. Similar, if you submitted a question when you registered, and as we go through today, if you find your question or a question like it isn't covered in our time, don't worry. In both of those cases, Eric and I will be keeping our eye on those questions, addressing them, and we do plan to answer some of those on Little Green Light's blog in the months ahead. So we do really appreciate all your questions. We want to answer as many as we can, so even if they're not answered today, don't worry, they're not lost. So as Eric and I reviewed your hundreds of questions, we were very impressed, because it's clear that you all are getting a lot done and you want to get even more done, and you want to work as efficiently as possible. Some of you are brand new to fundraising and you're figuring it all out. Some of you, maybe are facing a tricky situation, embarking on a new fundraising effort that is new to your organization. Across the board, we did see a lot of overlap among questions. And as we reviewed them, 6 categories really bubbled up as the most common themes that you all are looking toward to get some advice. So in structuring our Q&A time, we decided that we would go ahead and focus on those 6 topic areas that were the most popular. And so the ones we'll address today are expanding your donor base, improving donor retention, involving your board in fundraising, one of my favorites, one person trying to do it all, choosing the most effective fundraiser, and creating a fundraising plan. So that sets the stage. Eric, are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. So our first topic area is expanding your donor base. Talking a little bit, thinking back to Eric's circles that he showed us, keep those in mind as we go through these questions, because I think they're relevant. So Chelsea wants to know, what's the best way to break out of a cycle that her organization is in, which is that they're basically asking that same small base of donors, that same little circle that on Eric's slide, for money. So how do you break out of that? And then Todd is with a new nonprofit that is just getting started. And Todd wants to know how they can most effectively move away from just family and friends donations.
Yep. These questions, it's worth remembering, these are hard for any nonprofit. They are tricky for big nonprofits. They might have more resources on how to tackle it, but these are hard questions. And it's something that we all struggle with together. So I think it's worth remembering we're all in the same bucket there. Part of my answer, though, is going to be it depends, and that's probably going to be a theme throughout some of these, because there are many different types of nonprofits. But I do want to really dive in and see if we can linger here and really talk about it. So as Virginia said, let's think about those concentric circles. One big problem, like how to expand our donor base, can be broken up into like 5 smaller problems, these littler problems. How do you get people on your email newsletter? How do you get those people to give? How do you get those people to give more? It's a series of smaller steps, and I think it's a lot more easier to tackle them I've heard someone, say like at that point it's just a math problem. It's how do you get a little bit more percentage of people into each one. Maybe saying it that way is actually scary to some people who don't want to do math, but it is smaller problems than one bigger problem. So think about it that way. I will also say to both Chelsea and Todd, finding new donors is actually one of the things that events are good for. It gets new people into the pipeline. And there's a whole chapter in the Little Book of Gold that is called Events Will Kill You. So if I'm saying that events are good for this, then you should believe it. It works. So imagine a really small nonprofit with a board of 5 people, not even a very big board. That board could put together a list of 50 people, let's say, to get them to a breakfast fundraising event. If each board member is tasked to get 10 people there, many of those people will be new to them, and they will come because that board member was, their college roommate, or they work with them, or whatever it is. They will come because of the relationship that they have with that board member, that table captain, essentially, who's trying to get them there. They'll come to the event. You put a big effort into inspiring them, capturing their attention, and then asking them for a check. Many people will write a check, a one-time thing that, and they'll leave it with you, and you might never hear from them again. And that's fine. You still got a check, so not the worst thing. But some of those people in that room will be captivated. They'll be inspired. They'll say, I didn't know about this organization at all, and this is something that I could really get behind. Those people are the ones who become monthly donors, who become, potentials for major donors. And all of that really matters in like how you handle those people after the event. So how quickly you can get a thank you to them, how quickly, not just how quickly, but like, are you getting them onto your newsletter? Are you continuing to communicate with them and turn them into a more regular, more sustainable donor? None of that is necessarily easy. It's still plenty of work. It's a big project, but by using the relationships of those board members, sometimes you might have people who love you so much that they will serve as the table captain too. This is how events really start getting bigger. It can really work. Some organizations, I know, they look at this and they're like, I don't even know if we could, get 50. That's okay. I watched one organization here in Tacoma, watch their strategy, and they would do these really small events. Some people will call them like salons, where they'll get people in a room together. It could be 6 people, could be 10 people, a couple board members and some donors or prospective donors. And they'll just talk about, the issues affecting the nonprofit, or if it's a nonprofit that serves homelessness, they'll talk about what's happening with that in the community. And they'll have these just really interesting discussions, maybe at a board member's home, maybe in the back room of a restaurant, and they'll make an ask there to this small group. This group that I was watching, they did this 6 or 7 times in a year in those first like 2 years of their existence. That's a lot of work, again. But as they built up these donors, they started dropping events and getting the ones that they had a little bit more focused, a little bit bigger, until they eventually just had 2 signature events. And that was their approach for getting people in the door from like nothing. And I want to recognize that for a small nonprofit executive director who has really pulled in so many different directions, that there's plenty of work there. But if you're willing to do it, knowing that you get to start dropping them as they're successful, it might make it a little bit easier. You might find new opportunities. It can be a strategy to really start bringing these folks in. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention, with that small base of donors, it's also just as powerful to start trying to get them to give more. So take your 5 best, 10 best donors, take them out for coffee, meet them at their home, and get ready to make a personal ask for them to increase their donation. That over the long run as well, especially as donors come even just organically, always take those best donors and see if you can get them up year over year. That is just as successful as always trying to find the new ones when it really comes down to it. So that probably actually sets us up for the next question.
Yeah, it definitely does. So carrying that thought forward, our next topic is on donor retention. So looking at improving donor retention, and to that end, Jacob wants to know, how do we increase individual contributions? And he says, is it as simple as making the ask? I can predict Eric's response to that. Annie is balancing two things. She needs to nurture relationships to lead up to a big ask, but they also have a critical deadline to raise a certain amount of money. So what do you do when you've got two needs and you're looking at the same donors to attend to those?
Yeah, those are two really important questions, and I think we can start with Jacob and say yes, it is as simple as making the ask. That is how you increase individual contributions. There are a couple strategies within that we can talk about here. So, for example, you take your 5 best, your 10 best donors, and you spend some time. Like, you can't just sit them down cold turkey. You spend some time getting to know them, getting to know what they like about your nonprofit. And after you feel like you've gotten to that place where like you understand what they're interested in, what their motivation is, you invite them to another, coffee, or you go to their home and you ask them if they can increase their gift. It is that simple. It's that scary. I've done this. Yes, you might have butterflies in your stomach. It's just a key of getting them to fly in formation. I like that phrasing. Some of these people are going to say no. In fact, on average, 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 5 are the ones who will say yes to that, something like that. That has nothing to do with you. That doesn't mean that you did it wrong. It's just that, like, people know what they can give, and some people can step it up to another level, and some people can't. And you have to get yourself able to understand that if they say no, I can only give the 500 again, that's still a win. If they say no, I can't get to 1,000 like you asked me, but I can do 750, that's a win too. And if they say, yeah, I'd be happy to give 1,000, that's a great win as well. It's this kind of a process repeated over time that truly grows the pie, that truly helps a small nonprofit get more stable, get more funding, new programs, new infrastructure, so that you don't have to be doing all of the donor database management yourself. Maybe there's someone who can be helping you with that. All of this stuff comes in many ways because of those relationships that are sustained over time. The other strategy to increasing your individual contributions is actually turning your regular donors into monthly donors. And I think anyone who gives you $20, $50, $100, these are folks who you can try to turn into monthly donors, probably with some gentle nudges. So if you have, like, for example, a donate form on your website, big donate button, the first thing that someone does when they click that, they should see a monthly giving page or a monthly giving option, $20 a month as the default. I hope this is clear. I'm not trying to trick anyone here. We're not trying to trick the donor. It should be very clear what they're signing up for, because that's a bad juju all around if we trick anyone. The goal here, though, is defaults. If you give someone the one-time gift page as a default and it says $50, they might say, oh, I can do 100 or I can do 20. They'll decide. If you give someone the monthly at $20 a month, let's say, they might say, oh, that's a little rich for my blood, I'll do 10, or maybe I'll do 50, or I don't want to be a monthly donor right now, and they click over to the one-time gift and they make a $20 gift or a $50 gift there. But the key part is that you're bringing in a lot more donors this way as monthly donors. You can also use your annual appeal to turn people into, and events, to get people to sign up as monthly donors. So if you gave $100 last year, could you do $20 a month this year, $10 a month this year? I think asking for $20 a month is better for a $100 donor, because you get to step it up, and it's probably not something that they will feel, especially in these last few years as people have gotten used to Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and Substacks and all of these different things that they subscribe to with these smaller payments. This is something that a lot more people are comfortable with. And as I think anyone during that initial time of that COVID-19 pandemic will tell you, monthly donors were hugely helpful. It's really a powerful way to increase individual contributions at the base level, not just at the top level of your donor pyramid. So those are two really effective strategies, I think. Annie's question about nurturing relationships before a critical deadline, I think that it's really a nuanced take, a question that Annie has here, and what my head goes to is, like, you have a major donor who you think you could get $5,000 from this year. You got 2,000 from him last year. You think you could get 5,000, but you haven't quite connected. The relationship's not as solid as it was, or as it could be, and you're not sure if you can get it, but you really need it because there's this deadline coming up. How do you ask that person for money? And I really think in this case, transparency and openness are the way to go. So you could connect with this person and you could say, we're trying to get $10,000 by June 30th because da 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 da, and say why you're trying to raise a certain amount of money by this time. It's possible that 5,000 that you thought you could get, because the relationship's not where you want it, maybe you only get 2,500 because you hadn't had that time to build it up yet. But you also just got $2,500 toward, on the deadline that you actually needed it. You also might find that your reasons, this critical deadline, totally resonates with this donor, and they're like, oh yeah, I totally get that, and I was gonna, we were gonna give it some point anyway. Deadlines can be motivational for donors. They get them, and this is something that actually works very effectively in politics. They have can't miss deadlines. It doesn't make sense on the third Tuesday of November to give a candidate $100. It's all about what happens before, and so they really push it in those time before the deadline. People get them. If it's a real deadline, if it's truly something that everyone understands why you need a certain amount by a certain time, you can push someone a little bit. It might not be where you would want it if you were going to just let the relationship build first, but I think you should be willing to approach it with some transparency and openness about why you're doing it.
Great, thank you. So our next topic that we'll be covering in the Q&A is on involving your board in fundraising. And those questions, Pamela wants to know, are board of directors part of your fundraising strategy? How to get them more involved? Rebecca's question was submitted with different punctuation, so she's not asking, but it kind of made me chuckle because she says, board members who think they are fundraising experts because at least once in their lives have written a check to charity. I think a lot of us can resonate with that, feel maybe some of the energy and tension behind it. It's a very relatable scenario.
Yes. It is relatable, Rebecca. I definitely feel that. In my experience, when a board member is saying, no, well, this is how UNICEF did it when I gave to them, or this is how Habitat for Humanity did it when I gave to them. In my experience, they're trying to get out of work. That's just me. You have an approach that you're trying to do, and they're saying, I don't think we should do it this way. We should do it the way that UNICEF or Habitat for Humanity does. They're probably trying to get out of work. Maybe that's just my bias there. They're probably not volunteering to do it the way that UNICEF did it. I definitely feel that. I think that it's one of those things where if this happens to anyone, Rebecca or anyone else, trying to have that conversation with that donor or with that board member outside of the board meeting, I think is pretty important. Maybe have your board president there. You know, if this comes up during a board meeting, say, you know, I'd be happy to talk with, you know, through with you our strategy, our fundraising plan for the year. Even if you don't have a fundraising plan for a year yet, this is when you say you have one so that you can talk through it with this person, and not have it turn into like a board discussion about what you're doing. Boards would love to discuss those things, and you probably have other things that you want them doing. So try to get it to be a small group meeting. There's less grandstanding possibility in that. Lay out why you're doing this. You're almost certainly constrained in resources. These are the things that make sense, and you hope that they'll get on board with it. I think something like that is a strategy. I always love to try to pull those into smaller group things, educational, and try not to let, sometimes things are a bit of red meat thrown in front of a board and they just love to dig in and sides are taken. And if you can avoid that, I hope that that's a strategy that helps. To Pamela's question, yes, boards should be a part of your fundraising strategy. And I think that I gave a really good example. If you're having an event, a board might, like a breakfast fundraiser, your board members should be willing to fill a table with their friends or coworkers. That's a very basic part of their job of being ambassadors to the organization. They're not, you know, they're not doing the ask themselves. They're just trying to get their friend there. That's a really good strategy. Boards are great for some of those like relational things where like just because there's more of them than you, they can get a lot of people to show up at something while you perhaps focus on the actual details. So for this breakfast fundraiser idea, you might put together some of the logistics. You might be the one to print the name tags, but they're the ones getting people to show up. It can be a really effective model. I also really advocate, I've done this on boards that I have served on and worked for, is trying to get what I call the board memorandum of understanding, which is a fancy way of saying like, we all have something that we agree to every year that a board member is on a board. And it says things like, you know, they'll attend 80% of board meetings. They will be ambassadors for the work. And fundraising should be on a list like that. I will, you know, they should give to the nonprofit. Like let's start there. That's boards participating in some fundraising. They should probably be willing to say that they will do one, maybe two fundraising activities throughout the year. That might mean an envelope stuffing party. That might mean they'll call donors during your annual campaign and thank them for their gift. Those are things that board members can do. It shouldn't be that scary for them. And you know that everyone has agreed to participate when they sign up. And then you can let like your board superstars do more. They can run with the rest. But as long as everyone has at least agreed on some of the baseline, that's a pretty powerful start. Inviting people to events, if you have them, 1 to 2 fundraising activities in a year, and a gift on their own, that's more than a lot of boards do. So if you can get that, that's pretty good.
Great, thank you. Our next topic is one person trying to do it all. I know a lot of customers are in that position as they use Little Green Light. They're managing a lot. So Dawn is a sole employee and wants to know how she can balance everything along with fundraising that needs to be done at her organization. And Elise need some guidance on planning and running an effective fundraiser with one staff person, and that one staff person can only devote part of their time to that fundraiser.
Yes, Dawn and Elise, I have been there. I was the sole employee at City Club of Tacoma. It's hard. It is hard to run a nonprofit where you have to do the actual work of the organization, the fundraising, and supporting the board, because that's something that you really don't want to let go. They are your bosses. You want to make sure that they, like you and approve of the work you're doing. Those three things, you need to put a foot in each of those places. But you only have 2 feet. So how are you going to do it? It's quite a dance. And some of that is just part of the work, figuring out how you make that dance go. So here's some of the things that I think an ED is really well suited for. Let me start with that. You're the person who's most suited to ask those major donors for money. Those 5 to 10 people, at the very least, those are people who you are going to be able to make that ask more effectively than anyone else. So that's probably on you. It's work, we should be clear, but it is also, let's remember, some of the most effective and actually like efficient, like time efficient way to raise money that there is. We don't talk about this too much in the book because it's really individual donor focused, but the executive director is also the person most likely to write a grant request. You know the organization really well. You could describe any program better than any hired grant writer or volunteer who's willing to do it. You know where you want to go, where you want to take the organization, what makes sense for you. This makes a lot of sense for you to be that one. And if you try to delegate it, you're probably going to be answering so many questions from that person anyway that you may as well have just done it. One of my tricks for that is whenever I had a grant due, I blocked off the day from any other meetings just because I knew no matter how much time I put in advance, I wasn't going to get to what I wanted. So that was something that I really recommend. I also think that if there's an event of some kind, you are a very likely organizer. As I said, the board can help fill the tables. You're probably the one to sign the contract with the caterer. So some of those things like that. Writing the annual appeal, again, you might be the best person because you know the nonprofit. I just listed a lot of things. I don't want to hide that. It might, as you get started, it might be 20% of your time for that first year doing those things. But what I would put to you is that time is all the most effective stuff. It's and paired with, like a donor database where you capture all of that. It's the kind of thing that will let you grow much more quickly than if you do things that are less effective. And you can actually start getting out of that place where you are the sole employee. Maybe you can get a part-time development coordinator to help you with some of those low-end tasks that you just need off of your plate. Maybe you could get a contract event planner for something, just to help take that off your plate. Like whatever it is, I think that there's really power in just like choosing these highly effective tasks and then focusing on those, knowing that those are the things that are going to help get you out of the place where you are. So I think that would be my recommendation to you.
Great. Well, your emphasis on choosing those things that are most efficient and most effective to focus your time steers us perfectly towards our next topic, which is how to choose the most effective type of fundraiser for your organization. So Susan wants to know which events are particularly successful and involve the least amount of effort. So she's right in line with what you're saying, the least amount of, the most efficient events to focus on. And then William wants to know the most effective channel to raise funds. So whether that's mail, email, phone bank, or maybe events.
Yeah. This is one of those situations where it really does depend on the kind of organization that you are. There are some nonprofits where the people who they serve are also their donors. I'm thinking about like schools, daycares, lots of theaters kind of fit into this model, where it's a little bit easier to raise money from the people who you're already serving, and maybe it makes sense to do an auction because the people who are giving the items are also the people who are coming to bid. Auctions and all of that are really a lot of work. In general, my favorite event that I think is really successful is that breakfast event. And I really go deep on this in the little book of gold. You don't have to worry about alcohol, either paying for it yourself or that your donors are paying for it, and not, you. It's much cheaper to put on, and it gets it out of the way in the morning, and you're done. And also, if you do it really, really effectively, it can really inspire people. So that is my favorite event. The returns on it, I think, are really great as far as events go. To William's point about other effective channels, the most effective fundraising is one-on-one asking for money. When it really comes down to it, that is where the biggest bang for your buck comes from. But you can't just do that. I mean, you can't just ask those 10 people for gifts, because you need more. You need to start finding new people. And that is where the annual appeal comes in, some sort of combined email letter that goes out. That's where an event comes in to bring new people into the system. You mentioned phone banking. I have done those phone bankings. It made a lot of sense for like member renewals. This was a membership-based organization. That made sense for us, but it wasn't a big fundraising one. Direct mail, which I take to mean the kind of thing where you're like emailing just the general public. If you remember my circles, some organizations do direct mail, and they only expect like 1 or 2% back. It's a loss leader for them because they're hoping to turn them into donors later. I would encourage small nonprofits not to go that way. If you mean direct mail as in like mailing your current donors and asking them for money again, that is high on my list. So I hope that helps.
Great. Our next and final topic category we're looking at really gets to the foundation of everything we've covered so far today. How do you bring it all together, have a strategy, work toward it with goals in mind? So we're going to be looking at how to create a fundraising plan. Elizabeth wants to know the best way to put together a fundraising roadmap for a very small organization. And Julie's looking for some help developing a solid plan that's sustainable and with that classic limited staff time. So how to make it realistic.
Absolutely. A lot of this takes the willingness to say no to the bright, shiny objects that show up along the way. Oh, they're doing that. Maybe I should do that. So some of it is just like saying, here's my plan, and this is what I'm going to focus on this year. And if you hear a good idea, figure out if you can do it next year, but try to keep your focus. I really think that a fundraising roadmap or plan starts with the calendar. Look at what makes sense for your nonprofit. Get your 12 months, whether it's a fiscal year or calendar year, what makes sense for you. It's very common that a annual appeal comes at the end of the year. So let's maybe slot that in there for late October or early November. We're going to send mail to all of our donors, maybe some email, encouraging people to make a year-end gift. If that's your plan, that starts in September. I mean, I like Labor Day comes, put a note on the calendar, start planning the annual appeal. I've seen annual appeals done really well where you have that first one that goes out late October, early November. Maybe there's a reminder in December before for everyone who didn't give yet, and an email or two in there. And you can also even ask board members, as I mentioned, to like make phone calls to people who gave and thank them. That's a lot of work, but man, it is powerful. And that's your 4 months. That's September, October, November, December. That's your fundraising for those 4 months. Those are all the things you're doing. You're only getting money towards the end of it, but that's a pretty great campaign. Let's choose 2 more things for your year. If an event makes sense, if you're trying to get new people in the door, Maybe you want to do an April event. So January comes and you're like, okay, we're going to do a breakfast fundraiser and we're going to invite all of our current donors, and our board members are going to bring in new people through their contacts, and we'll do this breakfast fundraiser in April. That is your, January, February, March, April work. The rest of the time, April to September, might be the major gift cultivation. Maybe it's after April where you look at your list of donors and say, who is it that really stands out on this list? Who do I want to give extra attention to this spring and summer? And you meet them for coffee, you get to know them a little bit better. And when September rolls around, you can pull the best of those names off of the annual appeal, and you can focus those folks on that one-on-one ask. So you choose 10 people. By the time you get to September, you're like, I think that these 3 people, they're not going to give that much more. It just didn't quite work the way I thought. Keep them on the letter, but these ones I'm going to make those one-on-one asks for. Those are 3 different strategies. They're all asking, and they all, I think, fit pretty well together throughout the year. It's not that it's easy, but by spacing it out that way, you have a pretty good plan. There might be, and I should say, there might be specific reasons why you would choose to do something a little bit differently in there. Maybe there's something that makes more sense at a different time, because you're already busy with something else at a certain time. Like that's great. But really think about the calendar. Give yourself, for your big fundraising initiatives, a few months, because these things require work, and it's a lot easier to do them well if you give yourself the time to start planning early than trying to get a mailing out in the next 10 days, which you can do, but you'll do a lot better if you start early. So there you go.
So what's ringing in my ears from that insight, Eric, is that it's really valuable to have the wherewithal to choose the most effective fundraisers to add, whether it's an event or your appeal or your major gift asking. You need to be savvy in what you choose to add to your fundraising plan. And you need to be bold and confident in saying no to things that you've identified as not efficient, or by saying yes to this other thing that's kind of over here, it'll distract us from the 3 things we've decided to prioritize, and it's going to make those 3 things less successful. And so having the confidence and feeling okay saying this year we're not doing this, maybe another year, can be one of the best choices you can make for your fundraising plan and for your fundraising success, to not pull yourself in too many directions.
Yeah,
I think that can be hard for some of us to remember sometimes, especially if you've got the board member saying, hey, do this. So
yeah, fundraising is one of those things where there's always more that you could be doing. I mean, it's just the case. It always feels like, oh, I could do that, and I could do that, and I could do that. Stick with what works and focus on that.
Great. Well, I think that's a perfect way to end our time together. We are reaching the end of our time today. Unfortunately, I want to make sure before you go that you all know how to access your copy of Eric's The Little Book of Gold and LGL's companion guide. So that information is on screen. As a reminder, if you asked a question during today's session, or the question you submitted during registration or a similar one wasn't covered, Eric and I are going to be working with those, and we'll be answering some of those on Little Green Light's blog in the months ahead. You'll also all be getting an email with access to the recording of this webinar. I want to encourage you to visit Eric's website, forsmallnonprofits.com, where you can check out all of his books. He's got a lot of other great resources. Again, they're all for small organizations, so they will not make you feel like you can't do this. It's the opposite. They'll make you know that you can. And then I also want to encourage you, as we end and before you turn your attention back to checking your email or whatever the next thing on your list is, to just take just a moment or two to jot down two or three takeaways from Eric that really resonated with what's on your plate right now, just so those don't fall out of your head. You can carry them with you in the back burner and start to think about how you can put those into practice at your organization to take your fundraising to the next level. So I want to say a huge thank you to Eric for sharing all of this great information with us today. We're so grateful for your time. And I want to say thank you to all of us for joining us. And thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.